Hello, my name is Andrzej Łukowski. I want to welcome you very warmly here in a journey of a very special place in our region, to the Camaldolese Order in Wigrach. We are preparing a project which focuses on the monastery in Wigrach as a cultural heritage of the Camaldolese Order. This is a very special place, a place that has been visited by almost everybody who lives here in this part of the country. We have the host of the monastery here, Mr. Nogowski, who is the president of the Wigry Pro Foundation. Hello. Hello to everyone, every participant of the conference. As Mr. Łukowski said, this conference has been summarizing our recent project focusing on the cultural heritage of the Camaldolese Order within the project founded by the European Union from the Infrastructure and Environment Operational Program for 2014-2020, and we can say that the main objective of the project was to preserve the cultural heritage and the culture of our monastery, and it involved the hermitages on the upper terrace with land development and focusing on its main components. We also conducted some construction work, conservator work, and developed some cultural and educational projects as well. And we hope that all these objectives have been fulfilled, and we will expand upon this during our conference. And that's why we have very notable guests, notable people for the monastery, and because of the pandemic restrictions we can't meet in person, and we are doing it like this using all the modern technology available to us, and we are very happy to talk with you online with this summary of the project and the message that we want to deliver to you. We want to show you what we can, the new elements in our monastery. And like you said, we will have many great guests, and all the listeners can also have a active participation within the project. We have our chat room. You can post any comments you might have, any memories, fond memories that you might have when you visited the monastery in Wigrach. How are your impressions about the changes that occur in the monastery? We also hear very frequently that this is a pearl of architecture for the region. I'm very happy, Reverend, to have this kind of conference during a pandemic, which is absolutely full of very sad information, and I'm very happy that we have something that we can cherish, a very important element of cultural heritage, such as the monastery. Yes, we are very glad that the monastery is getting more and more beautiful every year. We have been developing various projects, we have applied for funds, and thank you very much to everybody who is actively supporting us with filing all these applications and settling them, and we will of course talk about that in the future in a few minutes. And we have to remember that this pearl of architecture in Suwałki region, it's supervised by the Foundation Wigry Pro, by the bishop, supervised by the local bishop, and we want to get as much funding as possible to make the best work possible for renovating the monastery, because it's very important. It's a very important piece of cultural heritage, and all the works are very expensive. We can't start renovating just one hermitage. We have to do a very comprehensive works on the foundations, on the plaster shutters, on the roofing, and that's why we needed a lot of funding. That's why it was quite expensive. But we are very happy that the Ministry of Culture and Natural and Cultural Heritage has been favorably looking at us and supporting us financially. And the financial support was very big. It was 40 million zlotys, and our own contribution amounted to 15%, which totaled the funds for the project as 20 million. So we could renovate all the 10 hermitages. And several years ago, we've also were able to implement a different project. And yes, well, now we are focusing on the renovation of these 10 hermitages and the clock tower. So these are the houses that hermits used to live in. And this is just a piece of wider history. Well, yes, when we look at the monastery, we see its various complexes and components. We will hear more on that from Reverend Ryszard Sawicki, who worked on this monastery, on this complex. And like Mr. Łukowski mentioned, this current project we are discussing is the biggest project that was developed by Wigry Pro, and that's the focus of our conference today. But I also want to mention about the first project that was implemented or carried out by Wigry Pro. It was also a 9 million zloty project, which actually totaled to 13 million zlotys, and it was focusing on the monastery as the cradle of cultural heritage in Suwałki. And we wanted to focus on the king's house, which is the biggest and most important building in the monastery complex, after the church, of course. And this is, and also the Chancellor's Chamber, which has papal apartments where the Pope spent 2 days, and from 8th to the 10th of June. So he slept for 2 nights here, and this was also implemented within a regional operational program for Podlasie. So once again, I have to thank very much to the Marshal of Podlaskie, who gave a very positive assessment of our project, and we were able to carry it out. And that was just the beginning of our work. So now, when we are able to deliver the 10 hermitages and the clock tower, we can finally see that the monastery is getting more and more beautiful. And this is not just a place for rest for all the visitors, but it's also a great lesson in history. We are teaching the history of the place, of the country. We are delivering information about our history and our faith. It also teaches patriotism, the ties with the local fatherland, because this is not only a place where monks worked. We needed a lot of hands available. So first we had to establish some farms and industry, and then we can only develop the monastery complex. Well, yes, we all can see the photographs of the monastery before the renovation and after. How do you? What's your opinion about the condition of our cultural heritage? Is this something that requires quite a lot of urgent action? Well, yes, I strongly think so. We have to remember that in 1993, the Ministry of Culture proposed to lease the monastery for 50 years, just as a suggestion to renovate it after the war. And we know that the local parish wasn't able to take the financial stress of this kind of renovation, because the walls needed to be reinforced, not for the building not to tumble down. And that's why the Ministry of Culture, when it considered that this is such an important point of our fatherland here, that's why they had this offer of leasing the monastery, and that's why we are very happy that the ministry has been so active in renovating it. And after these 30 years now, we see that there's a lot of construction work that's necessary, and we know that at the time, 30 years ago, we weren't able to get the necessary materials needed for the renovation. For instance, they had to be delivered all the way from Warsaw, and these works, this couldn't be completed in just 1 year. It took dozens of years. That's why the atmosphere, the local atmosphere, the lakes, the forests surrounding the monastery, it all made it possible for them to use only one type of methodology for instance, applying water protection, rain protection, and so on and so forth. And we know that some of these methods didn't work and had to be renewed now. And right now we see that this was the final moment to start doing work on certain elements. For instance, we had to focus on the foundations of these 10 hermitages, just in order to make them livable and possible for them to be still standing. So we had to dig up all the foundations and make it available for one of the hermits that still lived there. So I'm very happy that this is such a great success. We know that we have been able to save our cultural heritage, and we can use the hermitages now to teach about the Camaldolese Order, what they brought here, what they do here in the area, and I hope that all the visitors coming here will appreciate all the work that has been done here within the project. And I have to point out that we still have 7 other hermitages in the bottom section of our complex, so there's still work to do. Well, yes, I have been talking about tourism and with tourists, and everybody was unanimous that they are absolutely astonished by the monastery. They see the positive changes going on here, and they all agree with that. Well, yes, we have to bear in mind that the monastery is not only a museum, it's also a place for prayer, a place for various meetings, not only religious meeting, but we also hold exhibitions. We have these solitude trips. Yes, especially during this pandemic time, we need a lot of facilities that support our spiritual development, and quite a lot of people decide to rent our places, to book them and use it for this kind of cultural and cultural development. So we are trying to invite anyone who loves music, beauty, photography, theater. We try to implement aspects of these cultural components within our complex. For instance, we are holding a lot of concerts, organ concerts. We host meetings, conferences. For instance, within the Europe Christi endeavor, we also have plenar meetings named after Professor Strumiło, who was the curator of that meetings. Unfortunately, he passed away last year. We are also using we are also part of other programs like the Independent Poland, which also functions as something that promotes the country, because it's It also looks at other aspects of our Polish cultural heritage. Unfortunately, the summer is always too short, because if it were longer, we could have even more visitors to appreciate our great place. Unfortunately, we aren't really able to be here physically, so that's why we are also organizing online events. That's why we want to encourage everybody to contact us, to write emails to us, and we will absolutely deliver to your needs. So, yeah, once again, we are looking forward to your comments in the chat room. But like you mentioned, these times are quite tough, and it's very hard to plan something in advance. But the question is, when will we be able to visit the monastery complex in person to see all the renovated hermitages and the clock tower? Well, you can view it using our camera and do it remotely, but this conference right now is the conclusion of, and it summarizes our last project, and we hope that by the end of April we will be able to settle all the formalities with the ministry, and we hope that starting on May the 1st, when the summer season opens, we hope that the pandemic will not be against us too much, and we will be able to invite you here to visit the hermitages in person, to visit the exhibitions, to learn about the history of the Camaldolese Order. We have 12 different exhibitions on the Camaldolese Order. We have several surprises planned, where you can go to the clock tower and use a special app to talk with a monk who will tell you about the history of the place, and the monk via the app will also invite you to pray with him, and that's a very interesting thing. And when you look from the clock tower, you will also be able to see the coat of arms, the emblem of the Camaldolese Order. So that's two pigeons drinking from a single chalice. Yes, that's the original Camaldolese emblem. This emblem was created by Saint Richard, the original founder of the order, and it symbolizes the unity of life and Christianity. And as we know, this is a men's order, and when this kind of order was established, usually a female branch also was created. So these two pigeons, these two doves, symbolize those two branches which try to work in unison to serve as the order was originally planned to do. And we also have another emblem, and we have to remember that when Saint Ronald founded the order, it was a very strict rule. It's a Benedictine rule. So some of the followers left the original monastery to Tuscany, and they started to establish a different Camaldolese order. So that's the second congregation, the Monte Corona. And those followers came here to Poland, to Wigry. That's why we have another emblem which has 3 hills with a cross surrounded by a crown. So it's Monte Corona. And we can find this emblem also in Suwałki, because we know that the Camaldolese Order hasn't established only Suwałki, but also other villages and towns and farms. But that is the main reason why the coat of arms of the city of Suwałki has a direct reference to the Camaldolese Order. So when you visit the region of Wigry, you can learn all about this. It's quite interesting components of our cultural heritage. And during the summers, during the summer we also have other activities we can offer. We know that the Pope, John Paul II, visited this location in the 90s, and he said that, well, he appreciates the land very much, and we have to be very responsible in using it. We have to preserve it. So we have rafting events. We organize it together with the local municipality. It's a one-day rafting event, and it just visits local lakes and rivers. We also offer another tourism event in Klasztor, and we also use cycling routes. So the history of the monastery is very intertwined with its tourist offer, and I can assure you that Reverend Jacek can talk like he talks without end. But we have also other notable guests, and we are looking forward to your comments, to your opinion, to your memories, perhaps from your visits to the monastery. You can post it all in the chat box. And like I mentioned before, this is a special conference, an online conference that summarizes the recent project, the monastery in Wigry as a cultural heritage of the Camaldolese Order. So let's take a brief look at some of the images from the monastery. Our next guest is Professor Małgorzata Dajnowicz, who is the monument conservator for the Podlaskie Voivodeship. Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and hello, Mr. Andrzej Łukowski, the host. Well, I think we can agree that the monastery in Wigry is one of our biggest elements of cultural heritage, and we have to look at it, look after it. Yes, definitely, it's one of the most spectacular and the most beautiful monuments in Podlaskie. It's a monument complex, actually, which has several very important elements, and its importance grows because it's a monastery of it's a sign of our borderland heritage. because it's quite near the border, and it increases its historic and cultural importance. And the monastery complex has been becoming more and more beautiful in the recent years. Well, definitely it has. We've been looking after this for many years, and the host of the monastery complex has been very attentive to conduct good conservatorship work. We've been, of course, issuing a lot of agreements on the conservatory work and construction work, and we've issued dozens of permits to do these works, and we all see it as the very wide scope of construction work. And it doesn't only refer to the church and its immediate surrounding, but it also focuses on the other components within the monastery complex, because like I mentioned earlier, there are several buildings there, and ever since the 1950s it was included in the national monuments lists. And we are very happy to see the monastery in Wigry becoming more and more beautiful, and we are very proud of it. And we are very happy to keep it on our official lists of natural monuments and look after it together with the hosts. And the monastery complex is in a very nice location. It's surrounded by water from all sides, so it's a very good location. But while the water is beautiful, water is not really something that's good, has a very good effect on foundations and walls. Well, that is of course true, because as we have seen on the remodeling work that's been conducted on the monastery complex, the water is quite problematic. Still, we believe that the caretaker of the place are quite aptly doing what they can to remodel the buildings. We are of course helping them financially, and we are helping them to write programs for or plan the conservatory work. And I myself, as the monument conservator for Podlaskie since 2018 and in 2019, we have allocated more than 130,000 zlotys, Polish zlotys, to conduct work on the monastery complex. And these were works conducted on the interior aspects of the church, but also on some outdoor components. So perhaps some of the effects of these works aren't really noticeable, but with the caretakers' activities, we see that it all bears good fruit. We have more and more visitors in the monastery complex, and this all shows that all the works conducted here are very beneficial, and it shows that it's a very special place. So a lot of warm words coming from you to the caretaker, the Reverend Jacek Nogowski, who is listening to our conversation. Reverend Nogowski, do you have any response? Well, I can't do anything but thank Professor Małgorzata Dajnowicz and her office, because we do feel strongly supported not only by Professor Dajnowicz, but also some office workers, her office workers, representatives in the region, and we know that the monastery complex, the Camaldolese Order, is a gift not only for us but also for future generations. And all the programs that we have been developing, like Professor Dajnowicz said, well, they are a challenge, but since we have the great support support both from the Ministry and the Marshal's Office and the conservatorship and the support of local authorities and all the people involved in this project. I once again want to thank everybody involved and Professor Dajnowicz for everything that we were able to do together on the monastery complex. Of course, there is quite a lot of work still left to do, but we have been consequent in our endeavors, and we see that with the great cooperation that we have had to date, I think we can look favorably to the future. So once again, thank you very much, Professor Dajnowicz. Well, if I can just add one sentence, I also want to thank Reverend Nogowski, who is the caretaker of the monastery complex, because as the conservatorship office, we know what we can do to offer support, but we know that the main conservator is the caretaker, so we see that Reverend Nogowski is doing excellent work on a day-to-day basis, he is, of course, tackling the many challenges he has to face for his work, but he is very successful in these endeavors. So once again, I want to thank you too. So I think that the cooperation we have is a very good example of working together for a common good, for the common cultural heritage that we have. So both we see excellent cooperation with the caretaker of the monastery complex. Now, I want to add one thing. Well, I am representing the host of our diocese, who is very fond of looking after all the monuments, all the movable monuments and the immovable monuments in terms of property. We know that it is an example of the cultural heritage we have. And the bishop wants to increase the importance of the monastery complex, not only in our region and in our country, but internationally. We also have to remember that Pope John Paul II remembered this place, and many times he noted that we have to take good care of this place on the tourist routes here. So this is something that we have to do as the caretakers of the monastery, but we have to look at it from the perspective of the bishop, because that's also the personnel that cooperate with us in the diocese and the foundations, which offer their support to take very good care of the cultural heritage within the Camaldolese Order. And with the supervision of the monument conservator and the local monument conservator, we can do it well, so that it's both legal and good for the future years. So we are trying to employ the best available technologies so that we don't have to repeat the conservation work too quickly, and we can leave it to future generations in a very good condition. So once again, thank you very much, Professor Dajnowicz. Yes, I had a meeting with the bishop, and it's absolutely true that the bishop indicated that Wigry is a very special location, both in terms of history, and this is a big piece of history because it reaches out to the 17th century. And he also mentioned the natural importance of this place, and the John Paul II's visit in Poland in the 1990s. He decided to come to Wigry. So this also indicates that the place is quite special, and we can see the trail left behind by Pope John Paul II. So I also find this is an important element, and I see that it's a very big added value to the place, which attracts people who love history and want to explore our cultural heritage in general, and also appreciate the nature here. So it all works quite well together and shows how important this place is and how special this place is. Professor Dejnowicz, thank you very much for meeting us. Of course, we know this is a very difficult time of the pandemic. When can we meet you in person in the monastery so we can see the effects of the conservation and the renovation works with our own eyes? Well, I also want to invite everybody to Wigry, because this is a place we are very, very proud of, and we can see that it's getting more and more beautiful. And I have visited the location of Wigry quite a few times, and every time I find something new. So I hope that once the sun starts to shine a bit more strongly, we will be able to visit the place in person, not only remotely or online. So here's to that, and we hope that we will be able to discover more and more things in Wigry soon. So thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Mr. Łukowski, and thank you to Reverend Nogowski. Thank you very much, and all the best from Białystok. So, once again, thank you very much. This was Professor Małgorzata Dejnowicz, who is the Monument Conservator for Podlaskie Województwo.
Nasza konferencja online i przypominam,
welcome back to our online conference, and once again I want to stress that we are looking forward to any comments you might have. Just type it in our chat room. Now we have another guest, the Minister, Undersecretary in the Ministry of Culture, National Heritage and Sports. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for inviting me to the conference, which summarizes the project on the monastery in Wigry as a cultural heritage of the Camaldolese Order. Once again, thank you very much for inviting me. I accepted the invitation because originally the conference was supposed to take place in person. However, because of the pandemic, we can't do it. But using the occasion that I want to thank the organizers, the Foundation Wigry Pro, and everybody who was involved in carrying out this project. The project was founded by the European Union within the Regional Operational Program for 2014-2020, and I want to thank especially to everybody who organized this conference today and everybody who was involved in carrying out the conservation and construction work for the monastery complex. And I want to thank especially to the Bishop Jerzy Mazur, the Council of Wigry Pro, who decided to renovate the monastery complex. I also want to thank Reverend Jacek Nogowski, who is the president of Wigry Pro, the foundation, who looked after how the works are carried out, and he spent a lot of his time, a lot of his power to successfully develop all the activities. I want to thank all the contractors and subcontractors for delivering the works with a very strict deadlines. I want to thank all the designers, architects, and so on, everybody who was involved within the carrying out of the project. I want to thank the local monument conservators who looked after how the works were conducted. And ladies and gentlemen, of course I know that this project had a very wide time frame. It had it included renovation of the roofing, replacing windows and doors. It involved renovating a lot of the interiors of the buildings, the facades, and so on. We had to purchase elevators, make the facilities accessible, which is a very strong focus of the ministry right now, because we have to make all the places that we can accessible to people with disabilities. And we know that all the plumbing systems, ventilation systems were also renovated, the electrical installations, fireproofing systems were also renovated. We included multimedia displays internally and externally, so we had to buy a lot of equipment, and we know that this project was very big, very ambitious. It had a very big scope, and it was carried out from 2015 to 2018. And we know that still there's a lot of work to be done, and there's still a lot of work being conducted as we speak. So I want to highlight that while after a project is completed, we see that something becomes renovated and it's in good condition, we have to remember that this final effect was only possible through the involvement of a lot of people. So on behalf of the ministry, I want to thank everybody who was involved. So everybody I mentioned, perhaps who I have omitted, I want to thank for the big effort put into this important renovation. Now, why is cultural heritage in Europe so important? Generally, we know that monuments are quite important, not only because of their beauty and because they are mediators of history, they carry history, and they are inscribed in the local identity or national identity. And we know that memory fades. That's why we have to look after monuments, as they carry a lot of content, to preserve them in the best condition possible. And we are very happy that we have EU funds to spend on that in that endeavor, and we have the funds offered by the ministry as well. I want to mention that the biggest program in the Ministry of Culture is the funds that we spend on preserving monuments. We start collecting applications every year, then we analyze them, and then we have a second call for applications. And applications can be filed until the end of October every year, and then we have to analyze the applications so that we can have some results early in the beginning of the year. We started with just above 100 million zlotys. That was our main budget. but now we have increased it to 150 million zlotys every year. So we try to offer financial support to everybody who applies to us. And it's not an easy task because we have to analyze quite a lot of applications and we have to look that appropriate support is offered to all the oldest monuments. And that's quite important for preserving our national heritage in general. So funds are streamed to every possible element that carries some sacred or sacral cultural heritage. And right now I also, because I have before me some names of some other people who will speak with us, and I just want to mention one more thing that's quite important in preserving monuments and conserving very important monuments, because I myself as the Monument Conservator General, I have amended several acts of law to provide a lot of to provide more support to conservators and provide better support for certain monuments which we have seen devastated. For instance, which was happening before 2015. And I would just want to highlight two very important pieces of information, because how the act of law was amended. This actually doesn't really make headline news. So just to briefly talk about the changes that were implemented starting from 2017 and 2018. So mainly, since the 1970s, the local conservators have said that we have to form a separate budget for conservatory work, just like we have a separate budget for instance, environmental protection. And since the 1970s, we were unable to do that. And hopefully, with the support of Prime Minister Mariusz Morawiecki, we were able to have a separate budget from the Ministry of Finance. So now we have the National Fund for Monument Conservation. And that's very important for us, because at the same time we have introduced a new legal concept of a fine for devastating monuments. And we are very happy that our country is developing, but we can't allow construction companies, developers, land developers to devastate monuments. So there is a very special fine of 500,000 zlotys, for instance, for devastating a monument. And before we had the fund, all these fines were paid to the central budget. But now that we have the fund, all the funds, all the fines paid by construction companies go to that special fund. And we can then spend this kind of money to protect new monuments, for instance, by introducing fire protection systems, especially in sacral objects, wooden churches, for instance. We know that once a monument, a wooden monument, burns, you can't really rebuild it. So apart from that special fund or the funds that can be applied for, as I mentioned earlier, we also have a separate fund, the National Monument Conservation Fund, which is fueled by all the fines paid for devastating monuments. So we have provided additional support to conservators, local conservator. It's no longer the regional voivode who establishes the position of a local conservator. I do it now. We have 16 other officers, 16 conservators, one for each that region. Now the local conservators are still working in close cooperation with the voivode. So until 2017, voivodes have established the local conservator. Now I do it. And I think that this is a very good move, because as the conservator, as the monument conservator general, and as the head of the department in the ministry, we can supervise how the local conservators work, and since we supervise them, we have to be able to organize their work or to dismiss them if it's necessary. So also, we've introduced quite a lot of other provisions, other laws that are quite important for monument conservation. Thanks to, for instance, new acts, we don't even have to write some applications or some guidelines to local conservators, and we do it on actually a daily basis. And some of the guidelines that we issue to local authorities is that, for instance, we want to highlight something that has to be focused during construction work on some monuments. For instance, now they have to focus on maximizing the preservation efforts. For instance, we saw in some regions in Poland, we saw that the floors were absolutely demolished and replaced. For instance, roofing has to also be looked into more clearly. We try to maximize the substance, the preservation of the monumental substance. So we also offer guidelines to conservators, for instance, on how the aesthetic components of towns and cities are looked into. For instance, we see the main squares in towns and cities recently, which have been recently just made of stone. We know that in the Middle Ages, for instance, they weren't filled with trees, but we knew that in the interwar period, people started planting trees in the town squares, and we want to re-establish that function of town squares. We encourage people and encourage local authorities to plant trees, and we also try to work with the local conservators, mayors of towns, not to cut down trees in their town squares. We don't want to return to the Middle Ages, because, as you remember, there were only few town squares in the Middle Ages which were paved with stone. So we have to remember that keeping natural elements, trees and some bushes, for instance, are quite important to better expose the monuments, because it's presented in a very attractive space. Now, referring to the monastery complex in Wigry as a cultural heritage of the Camaldolese Order, well, I absolutely wish I was able to be there in person, but I hope that once we overcome the pandemic, I will be able to visit the place, because I'm absolutely curious how it looks like now. But we know that this place is important not only due for its architectural beauty, but I also believe that this is it's a very important monument of the multicultural history of Poland, and this is also a reminder for us about all the historic processes occurring in the region. It's a very important tourist attraction. And I believe that all these components are very important, and we have to remember that monuments, they have to work. And I believe that since tourists visiting, the number of tourists visiting this area will increase, that's a very good occasion to show the place, to show the cultural legacy of the place, to listen to its history, to learn about the people who are very important to the region, to find out something new. So everybody who loves monuments, who loves learning about monuments, they come in a direct interest with culture, with history, not only of the region, but in general. So that's why I wish and I hope that soon the monastery complex will be visited by tourists, by whole families with children, and parents will be able to encourage their children to learn about the very diverse history of our country. So, ladies and gentlemen, like I mentioned earlier, I've also noticed that today's conference will have presentation focusing on history and the history of art. So that's why I was very happy that you've presented a very important presentation on the project, and the project was very important. So once again, congratulations to everybody involved in this project, and I hope that projects that will be carried out in the future will follow this great success that you have. So once again, thank you very much to the hosts, the panelists, everybody involved in the discussion. Thank you to everybody who loves monuments. Thank you to NGOs who do a lot of work to preserve the history of the region. And I wish a lot more successful conservation work, a lot of great effects, and I hope that we will overcome the pandemic and we will be able to meet in person. And I promise to you that I will come here to Wigry and see the great effects of the works and see its the monastery complex as the great symbol of our mutual history, and I hope to do it quite soon. So thank you very much, and all the best to you, and once again, congratulations. Thank you very much. Just let me remind everybody listening to us that the lady speaking is Magdalena Gawin, the General the Monument Conservator General, and when using the occasion with because the Minister is present with us, I would also like to thank Professor Gliński, the Minister of Culture, for all the good work that the Ministry is doing for the not only for the monastery, but also with other aspects. We know that the Ministry of Culture, National Heritage and Sport, it's very important endeavor to look after all the monuments, and all these components are well preserved, but to further develop, to host patriotic religious events. And because that's what our monastery is used for. So once again, I would like to thank the Undersecretary Magdalena Gawin for all the funds that have been given to us from the ministry. And I think, I truly believe that this is all towards a common good goal. So once again, thank you to all our staff, our cooperators, who were able to develop our monastery complex. So our caretakers who were working closely with Agnieszka Wasilewska, the coordinator of the project, to carry it out effectively, to complete it, not only in terms of the construction work that was carried out, and I hope that once we complete the final financial settlements, we can invite tourists, visitors and pilgrims to our monastery complex. So once again, thank you to the representatives of the ministry and to the Professor Dajnowicz, the local monument conservator, who was working with us constantly, coordinating the works, answering any questions that we might have, and they keep asking us, what else can they do? So once again, thank you very much for that, and I hope that quite soon we will be able to see each other in person, not only remotely or online, but we can meet in person and show everything good that we have to show. So once again, I invite everybody to visit this place soon and see the monastery of the Camaldolese Order in Wigry, the renovated hermitages and the clock tower, which is another addition to our cultural offer. And quite soon we will be speaking with Agnieszka Wasilewska, the coordinator of the project. But first, let's take a look at some unique pieces of photography which show that the monastery in Wigry is worth visiting and any time of the year. So now let's take a look at some overhead photography during the winter.
Jest z nami anonsowana już
Like I mentioned earlier, now we have Agnieszka Waślewska with us, who is the coordinator of the project. The project's title is Monastery in Wigry as a Cultural Heritage of the Camaldolese Order. So, hello everybody, and I know that you have delivered many similar projects, but I think that this one was quite special. Well, it was special because all the application, the whole application process was preceded by a lot of preparatory work. So we had to do market research, and it was a quite a long process. And as you've said, I have been cooperating with Wigry Pro and other local church organizations, and I've evaluated quite a lot of projects, what's their cultural impact and so on. So I am quite experienced. That's why I believe that it helped me to deliver this project successfully. So let's try to be very brief and provide some information about this project. This project is co-funded within the Operational Program on Infrastructure and Environment 2014-2020. It's priority, it's measure 8.1, so we had to compete with other organizations for the funding within this measure. And just to look at the main objectives of the project, and its main objective was to protect and preserve cultural heritage, the hermitages in the upper terrace and with the supporting foundations, and that's part of the monastery complex in Wigry. And initially we want to cover the whole monument within that project, so that we could also renovate the hermitages in the bottom terrace. Unfortunately, because of financial restrictions, we couldn't have such a large scope. So the main, also the main objective is to add some cultural functions to the facility, so to expand its offer, so that we can renovate 12 hermitages and establish 13 permanent exhibitions, for instance, in the clock tower. So we believe that all these activities have improved the attractiveness of the region because of the access to culture, but also it improves the labor market, both in terms of tourism, in terms of transportation, communication, and so on. So we've developed quite a lot of activities in construction work and events and so on. Specific objectives of the project look into preservation of the monument that would be otherwise deteriorate and be inaccessible to future generations. We also tried to add facilities for improving the accessibility of the monastery complex. We've renovated pathways to make it more accessible to people who have mobility issues. For instance, they use wheelchairs, or we've also tried to improve the accessibility of all the facilities here. And in the past, only 12% of the whole area of the monastery complex was used, and now we've expanded it to 526 square meters, which amounts to almost slightly more than 80% of the whole area. And we've added additional aspects which are kind of a response to the local demands. So we've prepared interactive quizzes, audio descriptions, audio guides. We've prepared a special exhibition in the clock tower, which will be also possible to be used using external audio systems, and other important specific objectives is creating three new jobs in the foundation, Wigry Pro, and we are quite sure that other jobs are also created because of this indirectly. For instance, jobs in tourism, in transportation services, in catering. And another specific objective was the development of the creative industry surrounding the monastery. So we see that a lot of creative brands are developing within such monuments, creating new added value in other sectors. So our goals were quite ambitious. We want to have the turnover or the number of visitors amount to 95,000 people every year. And we know that before the pandemic, this was all planned before the pandemic. We wanted to increase the number of visitors by 6,400 people each year. We know that this is quite different now because of the pandemic, but we will try to do it otherwise. For instance, by providing online opportunities for visiting the monastery. So we've also applied to the ministry to have their support to show this facility to as many people as possible. We've tried to look for support in other types of funding. We looked for funding on monument infrastructure, and in that vehicle we had to look into investments on projects that are listed within the official register of monuments. So, for instance, we could use these funds to buy exhibition equipment, and this project involves the renovation of the hermitages in the upper terrace, and also provides work on supporting the foundation and walls. And these hermitages are used by monks from different orders, and these are like small houses with a very small garden, and the monks, the hermits, can use these hermitages to do their prayers and fasting. And we have 12 hermitages renovated within the project, as well as the clock tower. So each hermitage creates and also hosts an exhibition, a separate exhibition, and it has a multimedia exhibition with a special dedicated screen and players. Whenever somebody enters this hermitage, it all switches on and presents what it has to present. We also have a special exhibition in the clock tower with its separate screen and display. Now let me just briefly talk about the exhibition. It's not in any specific order, but it mainly focuses on the themes that the hermitages hold. So in Hermitage 13, we have an exhibition on the creation, on the establishment of the monastery. And originally, when the monastery was founded, this was actually some empty space. It didn't have too much population, so it focuses on how the Camaldolese Order came here in 1668, and one of the main documents is the land offer that was given to the Camaldolese Order, and it was approved by the bishop and Polish authorities and so on. And this special document actually sanctioned the funding of the Camaldolese Order. In Hermitage 14, we present some background information on some notable persons who worked on the who were involved in the history of the order, of the monastery complex. For instance, King John Casimir, several important historians, and so on. In Hermitage 11, we also look at how the Camaldolese Order lived life. So they look at all the property they have. Because once the order was established here, the area flourished. They contributed to the funding of the city of Suwałki. So the Camaldolese Order owned villages, farms, schools, and at the end of their rule, they looked after 9,000 people, so that's quite a large number. In Hermitage 10, we look in the Camaldolese industry. So the order owned quite a few sawmills, iron ore mills, manufactories, and small crafts. In Hermitage 8, we look at the first pharmacy or apothecary in Wigrach, the first local apothecary, where the local population could buy any medication that they needed. And the apothecary was located in a cellar for storing perishable goods like oils and so on. Or for preparing candles, the only source of light available at the time. They also had a laboratory with different cauldrons and barrels and wines and so on. In Hermitage 9, we all have a display of some paper processing plants, some paper processing elements. For instance, in bookbinding, and they had a tannery workshop or a carpentry workshop and so on. In Hermitage 12, we look at the facilities or the material background of the monastery. While the monks themselves were quite poor, the general property owned by the order was quite big. For instance, once there was a fire here, and it really didn't do much damage because they were so rich and they could rebuild. In Hermitage 15, we look at how patriotic was the order, because they didn't only focus on praying and so on, but they also were quite involved politically. In Hermitage 16, we look at the school, the local school that was financed by the order. Next to this church. During winter, the school had 50 students, 50 pupils, and 20 in other times of the year. In Hermitage 17, we present we have a very nice exhibition of the local legends. We show how the lake and the city was named. Why is it named Wigrach? We have a legend about one place of some special location on the lake that never freezes. We had a special legend about the common whitefish that's quite popular in the region. And once again, in Hermitage 12, we also present how the history of the monastery complex shaped after year 1800. We know that the goods were confiscated in 1796, and the order was dismissed from the city in 1800. Then a diocese was established and dissolved. Its history also involved that the complex hosted an infectious disease hospital, a prisoner of war camp, and it was destroyed in 1915 by the German army. Then again it was re-established in the interwar period, just focusing on a small portion of the original plan. And because it was only done by the local community. And in 1973, the Ministry of Culture and Art decided to re-establish and renovate the monastery complex, and it took 50 years to do this. And in Hermitage 17, we present different traces of the Camaldolese Order within the region. And we see it, for instance, in the names of local food or drink, for instance, which is of course served in the local catering establishment. And the final exhibition is the exhibition in the clock tower, which is quite unique because you can go up the tower to see the landscape here, and we've prepared a special display there which presents a scene from the life of a Camaldolese monk. And all the presentations are also available online. They will be presented on our website, and we will have more presentations on how the project was carried out. But just to once again return to the project from its establishment to all the and through all the steps leading to its completion. So first we started working on some preparatory work, and it almost took 2 years. We had to do market research to see whether this investment is actually necessary from the public perspective. Then we made a feasibility study to see how this investment is actually possible to be developed. We had to prepare some designs and construction plans, because we had to apply for a construction permit. For instance, that was, if we didn't do that, the application process would be quite risky, I guess. And so preparing all the designs were quite extensive. We had to organize also construction supervisors and authors supervision, which was prepared by a architectural firm from Olsztyn, and construction supervision was done by Arthur Pinkowski. We had many meetings with them. I participated in these meetings because we had to overcome several challenges that we stumbled upon. That's why I want to thank all the caretakers and supervisors from the Ministry of Cultures who issued opinions, who opinionated on the changes that we've introduced to the project. I also want to thank to Sylwia Szelong, who helped us go through the settlement process and who provided quite fast opinions on our applications. And we were supervised quite well by the Ministry of Culture, and our key activities were conducted by a company that was selected via tender procedure, and they carried out all the construction works and conservatory work in the upper hermitages, and provided facilities or furnishing for the exhibitions. The next task that we had to do was provide actions for promoting the project, and because of our current conditions, because of the epidemic, we originally planned to have this conference in December last year, but now we hoped to invite you here in person. But we now see that the current epidemic condition has only deteriorated, and we can only have an online conference like this one. And of course, we also had to focus on managing the project, on all the administrative efforts, and it involved quite a few people from the foundation, the parish council, and many other people, and we had to have a lot of meetings. The total sum of the project, the eligible expenses, is 21,455,470 zlotys, and the eligible expenses amount to almost 17.5 million zlotys. So the total financing we received is 85 of the eligible expenses, which is almost 15 million zlotys. And this is my brief presentation on the project itself. So thank you very much. Well, thank you. You were brief, but you were quite thorough, and I just want to remind us about the name of the project, the Monastery in Wigry, as a cultural heritage of the Camaldolese Order. And now we could top up our presentation of the project. We will see a short clip on some of the interiors of what has been established within the project, what has been achieved through it. And thank you very much again for taking part in our conference. And I also want to take this occasion to thank Mrs. Agnieszka Wasilewska, because I think she was the most important person involved in this project, who coordinated it, who brought the project together. And like you mentioned, there was a lot of people involved in carrying it out. The bishop, the Foundation Council, Reverend Dariusz, Mr. Robert, and so on and so forth. A lot of important people involved in carrying all these ideas out and fit them within the framework of the project. But Agnieszka Wasilewska also helped us to carry out the previous project, for which focused on how the Camaldolese Order, how the monastery is a part of the local heritage. And now we know that the next projects are also developed in Sejny. We see all these efforts as something that improves our cultural heritage. And thank you again to Mrs. Agnieszka Wasilewska for her great cooperation with the Ministry of Culture. She knows who to contact, where to find support, find the appropriate interpretation of anything that we need. So thanks to her support, we were able to carry out this project. So I want to thank her, not only from myself, but also on behalf of the bishop. And we also want to once again reiterate our thanks to you. Well, thanks, but as I said, this is all a mutual effort from our whole team. We had a lot of preparatory meetings, preparatory activities to help all the beneficiaries of the projects to intervene when they had to settle the project appropriately. So once again, thank you to Agnieszka Wasilewska, the coordinator of the project. And as I promised earlier, now we will take you on a trip. We will take you on a visit to the renovated hermitages in the upper terrace.
Podsumowanie projektu Fundacji Wigry Pro
We are
jako spuścizna
summarizing the
Zakonu
project
Kamedułów.
titled The Monastery in Wigry as a cultural heritage of the Camaldolese Order. And as you've heard, we hear a lot of very warm words. But we have to remember that the project was not an easy task, or carrying it out was not easy, because we have to remember that the monastery is located on a small hill, on a peninsula. It's surrounded by water. And when we talk with Reverend Jacek Nogowski, the president of the Wigry Pro Foundation, we can see that the project was very challenging. Well, the renovation was quite a challenge because we have to remember that all the 10 hermitages are located in the center of the monastery. How can we conduct the conservation work on an active monastery grounds that are still open to visitors, to the public? We have to remember that we had to dig up all the foundations, provide insulation, and the construction company that carried the works out, they had to purchase a special, smaller type of excavator that could enter the monastery grounds and conduct the construction work appropriately. So replacing all the installations, well, all these works they were very challenging. We had to build new foundation blocks. For instance, we saw that several foundations simply disintegrated over time, and we had to build them once again. And all these works had to be conducted during the summertime, not in the winter, when the monastery was closed down. Of course, we heard some visitors complaining that, well, it's not that quiet, or some works are quite dusty, but we had to ask them for some more understanding, because without conducting all these works, all the construction and groundwork, the monastery would simply deteriorate and perish. But now all that is behind us, and we can actually improve our offer to everybody who can visit the monastery now, see the themed rooms we have in, for instance, the catering section, which also with improved sports offer and rest and relaxation facilities that we have. And I really hope that you will have a very positive impression on the location and also the works that have been conducted. But like you mentioned, all these works had to be conducted during the tourist season, when it's warm. Because the weather is very important, and it actually affects how durable the works conducted are. And I have to say that, well, the weather was always very good during the conservation work. So the summer was very warm, and we could conduct the groundwork very thoroughly and very good, in a very good condition, and provide plastering work on the facades. So the winter was also quite short at the time, yet after, when the pandemic started, we were quite worried that some works would be stopped. But fortunately, the construction company delivered. For instance, they reduced their teams, but they continued working non-stop, except on holidays and Sundays. And fortunately, we see some God's intervention here, because we didn't have any people infected with the coronavirus, and the works were concluded very thoroughly and allowed to complete the project successfully. And we can finally present it to visitors.
Klasztor w Wigrach jako spuścizna kulturowa.
The monastery in Wigry as a cultural heritage of the Camaldolese Order, and we are summarizing this very, very important project during our online conference. And I just want to remind everybody that we are looking forward to reading your comments and answering any questions you might ask in the chat room. Our next guest is Reverend Ryszard Sawicki, who is the Vice President of the Caritas in the Ełk Diocese, who's authored many publications on the history of the monastery in Wigry. Hello.
Proszę księdza, co tak naprawdę,
Father,
z czego możemy
what do you
czerpać i co
think?
możemy czerpać, jeśli
What
chodzi
can
o
we actually
życie
take from
Kamedułów?
the life of the Camaldolese Order in Wigry? I actually believe that the history of their 130-year presence is very rich, but we have to remember that the resource base is not, for historic resources, is not that rich. Not too much documents have preserved, and I believe that the monastery complex is the pearl of the Suwałki region. It is distinguished by a very picturesque location, and it's an excellent example of a connection of aesthetic values with the beauty of nature. It's the center. It's in the center of the Wigry National Park today, and its rich history is connected with a hermetic order who had a very strict rule, and the monastery in Wigry had a very big impact on how the cultural, religious and economic life of that region developed. Yet before the area was inhabited by the Camaldolese Order, until the end of the 13th century, the land was basically a forest, a natural barrier between the Teutonic Knights and Lithuania. And the Grand Duke of Lithuania established a hunting grounds here, visited often by the local rulers and kings, including Władysław Jagiełło, a Polish king. And thanks to the efforts by the Lithuanian Chancellor Christopher Sigismund Pats, who was the great protector of the Camaldolese monks, and in 1667, King John Casimir founded the Ermus Insulae Regalis Vigrensis, which basically founded the order, and the foundation of the order was aimed to appease to God, to bear some good fruit on the land. And the constitution was, the local constitution of Lithuania analyzed this decree and approved it, and then the following kings, John Sobieski III, and other notable persons also agreed to funding of the order. And these names are quite surprising as they occur in certain documents, because we know that Cardinal Giulio Rospiglios was elected Pope in a conclave on the 20th of June of 1667, and we know that Casimir Sapiecha was just a bishop of Samogosia, and he only became Bishop of Vilnius until 1668. So it's quite possible that this document was predated, and once it was found again in the 18th century, royal officials accused the certain people of forging this document. And once the island was officially delivered to the Camaldolese Order, we can see it in a painting which is preserved on the eastern wall of the St. Romuald church. And I want to thank Małgorzata Dajnowicz, who is the local monument conservator, for allowing me the opportunity to present to publish an article on the results of research that I conducted. And you can read this article in the recently published journal. And the title of my article is History in Frescoes, the Royal Foundation of Jan Kazimierz, Erums Insulae Regalis Vigrensis. So the Eremites of St. Romuald settled here in 1668 and soon began to develop the hill. Initially, Wigry was a branch of the Bielański convent near Warsaw, and in 1685 an autonomous priory was erected, and its first supervisor, head of this order was Father Michelangelo. And shortly, wooden buildings were built here to serve the monks, and after the fire in 1671, they decided to build new buildings out of brick. In 1694 to 1745, a brick church was built. The church was the Immaculate Conception of the Blessed Virgin Mary, and it survived until today, although it was demolished several times, but it still survived. And it was most likely designed by Italian architect Peter Puttini. And to finish the temple, a lot of expensive materials were delivered here, were bought to be here, including black marbles and Italian majolica. And there are certain historic reports on how beautiful this place was. For instance, the ecclesiastical furnishings and the priest's vestments were quite tasteful and were examples of the splendor of this God's house. With all of this, they wanted to present to the pious people the greatness of God, His power, and the vanity of the world's money. And this is the words of Aleksander Połujański, who traveled the land and wrote down what he saw. Along with the construction of the church, work progressed on other buildings, 10 hermitages, the small houses for hermits, the clock tower and facilities. And all of that was surrounded with walls, or retaining walls, and many of these buildings had their separate names. For instance, the wine shop, honey shop, beer shop, vegetable shop, shops for bricklayers, carpenters, wood carvers, painters, blacksmiths, watchmakers, and so on. They were usually invited here from other countries, and from Italy, England, and Prussia, and trained locals in their crafts. According to Połujański, 2 fish farms were situated not far from the monastery, and apart from all the gardens with the hermitages, the Wigry Monastery had also 3 very big fruit orchards. And now we could ask ourselves how daily life of these Camaldolese Order monks looked like. In 1773, we know that there were 23 monks in Wigry, 15 priests, 2 clerics, and 6 lay people. And Ludwik Zarewicz wrote about them like so. Leading a very austere life, they constantly exercised themselves in pious contemplation, kept the strictest silence and constant fasting, and each of them ate fast in their hermitages, which also the monks wore long beards, walked barefoot, and slept on hard bedding. In a word, everything about them resembled vividly the Egyptian or Syrian hermits of the first Christian times. Also, the monks looked after their own spiritual development. They had to remember that the land they owned was vast, but it was populated by people who absolutely needed good supervision. In 1788, people saw that there was historical reports that prior to the approach of the Camaldolese Order, people didn't really observe sacraments. And while the monks weren't able to provide all the sacred services, they quickly decided to establish churches and invite regular priests. So they established in a church in 1680 in Magdalenów, which is quite near this place, and first these churches were serviced by local priests. Thanks to the efforts of the Camaldolese Order in Wigrach, they were able to establish a primary school and two shelters for the sick and infirm people. One of them was situated in Suwałki and the other one in Wigrach. And we know that the Camaldolese monks were the pioneers of the economic development of the region. And they did it together with the Dominicans from Seine, and they not only supported the development, the religious development of the local population, but they also established well-developed economy here. In the Camaldolese Order properties, we see very interesting plants. They also owned 6 mills, a lime kiln, a brewery, a malt house, and the property had 404 honey farms. In 1715, we know that the estate included 5 manors and many other establishments. In the 1789 census, we know that they had 1,352 smokes, which is basically a smokestack or houses, and the total population of the land was 8,452 people, so that's quite a lot. At the time, they also established various towns and villages like Suwałki, and the Camaldolese Order were quite vehement in providing certain opportunities for development of these villages. And in 1715, Father Ildefonso, the prior of the monastery, issued the privilege to found a town. And the process was completed in 1720 when King Augustus issued a privilege giving Suwałki the status of a city, following the Magdeburg Law, and the town authorities were appointed by the monastery. The mayor, the aldermen, and the jurors were also appointed by the monastery. So the origins of the city is quite interesting, and it was one of the richest towns of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. And by the resolution of the Sejm of the Republic of Poland in 1775, the collection of stamp duty or taxes was changed, and we can establish it at 54,000 zlotys at the time. And for comparison reasons, we know that Bielany near Warsaw had only 14,000 zlotys of income. In Rytwiny and Bielany near Kraków, we know that order had only 8,000 zlotys of income. So we can clearly see that the monastery in Wigry was very rich, and its economic endeavors were something that any company today would also be fond of. Of course, the Camaldolese Order had to live in very tumultuous times, but they were also perceived as a very big patriots. For instance, they offered all their silver they had to fund the Kościuszko uprising, and they also provided material support to the people who were involved in the uprising. For instance, one of the monks in the order was also sentenced legally for supporting the uprising because of the by the order of the Prussian overlords. And once the situation was changed, once the land was owned by the Prussians, they decided to change the monastery complex into a parish. And I think that the rich history of this diocese during the Prussian partition of the land from 1807, when it was the Russian partition, and I think this history is very well described in my publication on focusing on the pastoral activities of the monastery. And I encourage everybody to look into it. After the diocese was disestablished in 1818, and the monastery complex was included into the Magdalena parish, and this is where all the local masses were held, from Magdalenów to Wigry. A lot of damage was done when the Austrian prisoners of war were settled here, were kept here, and they quite they increased the damage on the properties, and a lot of damage was also caused by the weather conditions. For instance, when the copper sheeting was torn off during a very big windstorm, the interior of the church became significantly impoverished. The equipment and the works of art were divided between neighboring parishes, for instance in Suwałki and Jeleniowo, and people don't know where they are now. In 1837, the garden tower collapsed, and in 1844 the government announced a public auction. Soon the buildings which were ruined were pulled down, and the temple was restored in 1860 for the local population to pray in. Unfortunately, in 1914, the church, as a result of the fighting during the First World War, because the position warfare that was position fights that were conducted here, In the Second Republic of Poland, the temple was rebuilt, and that took place in the 1920s. And the renovation work was designed by Oskar Sosnowski. On 15 August 1933, during indulgence fast on the Assumption, the temple was rededicated or reconsecrated, and after the completion of the above-mentioned works, the local authorities started to think about bringing the Camaldolese monks back to Wigry. However, this was quite expensive and was not really implemented. Now, during the Second World War, the church tower served for the Germans and later the Russian as an excellent observation point. And for some time, the parish was used by German scouts as a post. In 1947, the rectory was rebuilt, and it was part of the refectory building. And between 1949 to 1963, the church, the hermitage, and the friar house were also reconstructed. The retaining walls were also protected and rebuilt. Some of the original damage was reconstructed. The parts that were originally damaged were reconstructed. So in 1973, the Ministry of Culture and Art decided to lease the monastery complex for a period of 50 years and started additional reconstruction work based on the surviving iconography and icons. A lot of icons and paintings were prepared by a local artist, Wiktor Winkaitis. I also encourage you to read my monograph about him entitled The Last Camaldolese Monk of Wigry, around the person and work of Wiktor Winkaitis. And the historic building was the seat of the House of Creative Work for several decades, and in 2010 the Ministry of Culture terminated the lease, and now it's the object of the Wigry Pro Foundation, and it looks after this. So we have to remember that in 1999, the Holy Father John Paul II visited the Wigry Monastery. It was for him a place full of memories from the times when he was canoeing on Czarna Hańcza River through the Wigry Lake. And when he chose the monastery in Wigry as a place for his two-day rest, the Pope wanted to show how people can look for God in the beauty of surrounding nature and how to regenerate their physical and spiritual strength. And Saint John Paul II seems to confirm the words of Ferdynand Antoni Ossynowski. Wigry is the only place where a man, without breaking off his relationship with people, can calmly, without hurrying, make an examination of his conscience, understand what has been done wrong to him and how he can correct it. Looking from the top of the church tower at the inaccessible lake, at the dark wall of the forest and the silver ribbon of the Hańcza River, one involuntarily thinks of past history and great people, of the nothingness of earthly matters, and the majestic, impassive wisdom of nature, which does not recognize bonds of time, temporary human rights, always paid for sweat, tears, and blood. Thank you very much for listening to my presentation. Well, thank you very much for this elaborate presentation of the history of the local monastery complex. Can I say that today the monastery complex is actually in a very good time? Is it a good time for the monastery in Wigry? What do you think? Well, looking at its difficult history and how beautiful it has become in recent years, I think that it has actually re-established its flourish, and we can once again rediscover the papal legacy, the Camaldolese legacy. I think that Ryszard Sawicki, Reverend Ryszard Sawicki, has had a major contribution. He worked here and he has a lot of historic research conducted here. He published quite important publications. He dug through our archives to establish the history which supported our applications filed to the ministry, and it gave a lot of background on how historically significant this place is. So once again, thank you, Reverend Ryszard Sawicki, for all the good work you've been doing. Now, while you're not working here, you are still interested in the location, you are still publishing new articles, and hope to see you soon. And thank you again for this mutual endeavor. I truly believe that I have left a piece of my heart in Wigrach.
Pora na kolejnego naszego gościa.
Now we have another guest, Mr. Jarosław Zieliński, member of the Parliament.
Szczęść Boże, kłaniam się.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen.
Poseł tej ziemi.
And Mr. Jarosław Zieliński is our local representative in the Parliament. How often do you visit the monastery complex? What changes have you seen recently? Well, I see all the very good changes introduced here. I know that Wigrach is the pearl of our culture, not only in religious terms, but also nationally. And we have to do a lot to establish its work. And we see that the construction work that has been recently conducted using increased financial support have re-established its former greatness. And as a member of the church, as a citizen of Poland, and as a person from Suwałki, from the region, we see that this is a very important thing. And I'm very happy to visit this place for on any occasion that I have, and my heart is filled with joy when I see the progress of the work that is conducted here. And we see that it's no longer deteriorating, but it looks better and better every year. And I think I see it as an added value for the region, not only in terms of tourism, but also in terms of preserving this very important monument. I have a question to you. Do you have a favorite spot in the monastery complex? Well, the whole peninsula is absolutely stunning and beautiful, but I really like to look at the lake from the walls of the monastery complex. So whenever I visit the place, I try to go to the walls and have a moment of solitude when walking and looking at the lake. I'm also very glad when I have the opportunity to go to the church, to pray there myself or with my wife. And I want to thank Father Jacek Nogowski for his efforts put into the restoring the old greatness of the church. And while it's old, it's being restored in a very modern manner, using modern technology and top materials. And I'm absolutely astonished every time I'm here, and I think everybody can appreciate it. I'm absolutely astonished by our ancestors, the Camaldolese Order, the monks who established all the land here, the monastery and the monastery complex. Because if we could build it today, we have all the technology available, the machinery, we can do it very quickly. And yet our ancestors did this with no machinery at all. They had to do it by hand, they had to find local resources, and we are very glad that this is here. And well, the absolutely astonishing landscape of the Wigry Lake is now available to see from the renovated clock tower. And I want just to add that the minister is also local, and he visits the complex, the monastery complex, and I really want to think about the monastery complex not only in terms of its religious aspect, but also from its patriotic aspect. And the faith brought here by the Camaldolese Order, they also focused on the patriotic importance of faith. So whenever it's possible, we try to organize any cultural events. For instance, the Independent Poland program, and we can show that the monastery is alive not only in its spiritual sense, but also in its national sense. So I want to thank Minister Zieliński for that, and also thank you. Father Jacek Nogowski, for all the support that we get from you to make the monastery a special place. For instance, when we celebrate the National Army Day, and it's also on the same day when we have a very special festival in Wigry, when we look at the conjunction of the national and religious importance of this place. We are quite happy when we can have a lot of people taking part in these two events, when we organize it together with our army, our police forces, and other services. And we can, I think, add to that beautiful endeavor to establish it as a traditional as a future tradition, because we have room around the monastery complex. We have to remember that it was visited by Pope John Paul II. A lot of penitentiaries want to visit this place to see how it's developing. And we are doing a lot of work using the Independent Poland program to encourage more and more visitors. And hopefully the pandemic will end soon, and we will be able to see the place in person, not only remotely. Now, returning to the subject of renovating the monastery complex, I think it's very important that the nation, that our government, the government of law and justice, sees the importance of these kind of endeavors and decides to spend the resources offered by the Ministry of Culture to provide more and more expensive works. While we know that these works are quite important, we also talk with the Minister of Culture, Piotr Gliński, and he understands and recognizes our needs, and he sees the needs established within our applications. I spoke with him on many occasions, and I think that he will look favorably on it and provide additional funding to the ministry, to the monastery complex. And I, myself, as a member of the parliament, am doing a lot of work to provide support for the monastery complex and the work that's being done on a daily basis in the monastery. So I think that with the support of people who understand the importance and the needs of the monastery, we can be very satisfied with what's being done, and we can be happy that this will be still living embodiment of what we can do. I think we can thank the Minister Gliński later, because we have been talking with Mrs. Gawin, and we also want to thank Mr. Gliński, because we have been contacting the Ministry of Administration, the church fund, to provide additional resources for renovating systems that we can establish within our facilities. And we contact many local authorities, not only in the regional sense or in the central government, but that's also thanks to you, the member of the parliament that is local and comes from this land, so that we can establish our local history and the history of our fatherland. Thank you. I know that the needs are big, and we have to provide a relevant time frame for all these all that resources. We know that there are available funds from the ministry, from the church fund, and from regional resources, but we know that we need to support the Elk Curia, which was again, when the lease was terminated from the Ministry of Culture, and now we know that once it was returned to its rightful owner, we see that the host that is near can actually take a lot better work, can make a lot of better work on what's being done here. And we have to remember that it is a joint effort. We can't leave all the works done just for the sake of the parish, without any support from the state, because these kinds of organizational units won't be able to face the challenges or the financial challenges offered by these kind of type of work. And we have to recognize recognize that
Pośle,
this
może za
is
daleko wybiegam, ale czy pandemia, bo
a
taki
joint
czas
and mutual
mamy,
common
zatrzyma tych kolejnych
cultural
planów,
legacy for
dotyczących,
us.
remontu
Now,
kolejnych obiektów na terenie
is the current
Kasztorskiego,
situation
Klasztoru,
in any way
wiadomo, że
affecting
one były
the
prowadzone w
works
ciągu
that
szczególnie
have been
ostatnich
done or
kilku
will
lat,
be done in the future on
czy
the
finansowanie kolejnych remontów
monastery
jest
complex?
zagrożone. Wiadomo, że
Now,
w czasie
are they
pandemii,
facing
są
any
inne
new challenges
wydatki.
posed by the pandemic?
Myślę, że w takim wymiarze, który pan pyta,
I think that within the scope of your question, I don't think that the pandemic will affect how the works are progressing. I know that there are special departments and commissions that analyze the applications.
To wszystko nie jest nieograniczone.
Of course, our resources aren't infinite, but I think that the pandemic won't stop the renovation works because we are looking at the market and from the perspective of contractors, subcontractors. We are looking at how road construction works are occurring. We are monitoring these events, and we don't see any significant impact of the pandemic on this kind of contract work. I'm quite optimistic in that respect, and in terms of any grants, financial support, well, that all depends on what kind of applications are filed, and I think that you can count on the positive approach from the state, and I will be definitely offering my full support for you too. Well, in terms of the completed work on the monastery complex, I think they kind of sped up the local economy because thanks to these works, a lot of people got jobs in this kind of difficult situation that we have right now. Well, whenever you build something, whenever you renovate something, it's good work. You need to have a person who does that work, and they can earn a living, earn money. We can create jobs, create income, which is then spent on other things, providing further turnaround and turnover when people buy materials. So money earned in an honest type of work is always good. So whenever there's an investment, whenever something good is built, it all provides good effects in other areas, because when the income increases, whether it's the income of companies or the income of persons, it provides good conditions for further development in other services or goods that you might just buy, because revenue is always good, and it's important in terms of the taxes that are then levied and paid to the states, which creates redistribution of wealth, creating further investment, and revenue is always good, turnover is always good, depression is bad for our conditions, so that we need to remember that we have to have turnover encouraged not only by entrepreneurs, but also by local authorities. Well, now a question to Father Jacek Nogowski. How did the contractor deliver their work? Well, I guess you could come here and see it personally, but since we have actually received all these works and have opinioned them very well, I believe that it's all going well to have a final financial settlement with the ministry. Now, summer is looming near, so I can encourage everybody to visit it and compare how it looked like before the renovation and how it looks like now. We are still keeping a few surprises for visitors in the clock tower or in the hermitages, and I believe that our cultural offer is quite surprising even for people who have visited the place before, and they can share their findings with others and encourage further visitors or additional visitors who will be able to see that the money obtained from, or the financial resources obtained from the ministry was spent well, and we will provide it for the future generations. So thank you very much for inviting me and others to the monastery complex, and I always try to respond positively to any invitation I receive from Father Jacek Nagowski. So thank you very much for finding time to talk with us. Thank you. I hope that you will be able to finalize this excellent project, both in its material sense and its spiritual sense. We are very glad. So God bless all of you. Thank you very much. God bless you too. I hope and pray for a quick conclusion of this pandemic so that we can actually meet in May or in June in person and bless this place so that it stands for many years. Yes, thank you very much. And I spoke with Prime Minister Gliński to find a suitable time and visit this place.
Kolejnym naszym gościem wojewoda podlaski.
Our next guest is the voivode of Podlaskie, Mr. Bogdan Paszkowski.
Szczęść Boże, jest z nami oczywiście gospodarz wigrackiego.
Of course, we also have with us Father Jacek Nagowski. So the Camaldolese Order in Wigry, we have just concluded the next part of the renovation. The monument is shining an ever brighter light now. What is your opinion about the place? You are a historian by profession. I absolutely agree that this is a beautiful monument, beautiful place. It has beautiful history, and I'm very happy that with the care of Father Jacek Nagowski, this place is getting even more beautiful, more and more beautiful, thanks to all the different sources of funding that's given here to re-establish its shine. Because, as others mentioned, this is the pearl of our monuments. It's located in a very beautiful surrounding with nature, and it has a beautiful history. It has important recent history, like the visit of John Paul II, the Pope, the establishment of the city of Suwałki, in further history, and we of course know that the city of Suwałki has a very important relationship with the monastery. I see it also as a place along many routes, because it's a destination of many trips. For instance, it's a very important point. For instance, if we have trips to Vilnius in Lithuania, they always stop in Wigry. Well, Vilnius is a very important place in history, in the history of Poland, of our Baroque times, and that's a very important location for religious endeavors. I believe that it's absolutely important, and Wigry is also important. We remember it's the very important visit by John Paul II
bardzo dobrze poznał.
Who knew this location very well. He was canoeing here quite often in the region of Suwałki. So his visit in 1999 was very sentimental, filled with a lot of emotion when he visited with us here. And I believe that all this proves that it's a very historically rich place. Well, just several years ago, we saw a lot of damage that occurred here. Now, recently we see that this location, this facility is flourishing. We see a lot of effort given by the government, by the local authorities. I think that Father Jacek Nogowski can say a lot about this recent development, because we see that the importance of this monument during the rule of law and justice and the united right is quite important here. I think that this can be seen in the resources allocated to this great monument, to maintain it, to conserve it, to preserve it for the future. And we know that these facilities are very important, and it is very important to maintain the life and livelihood of this facility and the local community. And because it's very important in its cultural aspects. I've taken part in many events that took place in the Wigry Monastery, and I was always very happy to be here. That's why I'm glad that this monastery is becoming more and more important, and I see all the local benefits like summer festivals, end of summer festivals organized here. So if weather is good, then all these events are also very fruitful. I was recently here, the last time I was here during the end of summer festival, well, the weather wasn't that good. Well, the voivode has mentioned a lot of good things, but yeah, usually when I visit Wigry, the weather was absolutely sunny, so that was just one exception during that last end of summer festival I mentioned. But that was just at the end of the festival, so that's not that bad. Yeah, so when the voivode comes alone, the weather is sunny, but when he comes with bearing guests, well, then the weather is might not be that great. Well, I also want to thank the voivode for our the mutual care that we give to the pearl of our local monuments. I am very happy for all the positive feedback we get from our applications. That's why I want to thank the voivode for his support and for the support of the monument conservator for Podlaskie, because if not for them, we know that this monastery was established in the 17th century, and it requires a lot of work to maintain these buildings, keep it up to shape, and we have to remember that we need to get here somehow, and that's why we need the support from the road authority to get here safely by car. And like we mentioned earlier, Vilnius is quite near, and we have to remember that it's nearer to Vilnius than to Warsaw. So we have a lot of visitors, and I also want to thank the voivode for the common care we put into the monastery and in terms of its culture and religious, cultural, religious and social infrastructure that is improving. So I don't think we can say of ourselves still the Poland B, east of Wisła River, but it's still a very important pearl of architecture and monuments. I think that the availability and accessibility of the region will still be improving. For instance, thanks to the runway that's been recently built in Suwałki. We have to remember the Via Baltica road that will connect this part of the this part of Poland with other parts of the country and other regions. We have to remember that among the monuments that we have in the region, the monastery in Wigrach is one of the main hallmarks of our Suwalskie local resources. And I hope that one day I will be able to come to Wigrach and stay here for a longer period of time in the monastery in Wigrach, to spend the night in the cells of the monks, the hermitages, which are made available to people as a place for rest. Of course, you can book a room even now, but I just want to remember that the project that we are summarizing right now was used with public aid. We have to remember that the hermitages will be made available to people who want to discover the cultural heritage of the region, but they are also but we also have the hermitages in the bottom terrace, and they have been renovated recently, so you can just pick a place. You can book these houses for several nights, spending each night in a different one and getting to know the history even better. And now when I look at when I look forward to the end of the pandemic, which has been stifling our efforts, I also want to say that I really wish that we could do more, because we planned a live conference, a face-to-face conference, and unfortunately we have to do it remotely. Online, but thanks to the efforts done by the priests in the monastery, I think we will be able to go through this difficult period and soon start using the renovated facilities in Wigrach. Thank you very much, Mr. Voivod, and hopefully see you soon in Wigrach. I'm looking forward to it, and I will be very happy to use to make good on your invitation. So thank you very much for coming, and I wish you will come here. And Minister Gliński also said that he would visit us before the summer. And so hopefully the pandemic will come to an end through our joint efforts, and hopefully at the end of May, beginning of April, of June, we will be able to invite many guests here and bless the facility and bless the newly renovated facilities. Thank you very much, and congratulations on such a great project. Which benefits the Wigrach Monastery. So all the best to you, and hopefully see you soon in person in the monastery in Wigrach, hopefully in good weather conditions, because the monastery is absolutely beautiful and we could be using the great great surroundings of beautiful nature. Thank you very much.
Wojewoda Podlaski był naszym kolejnym gościem. Dziękuję.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wojewód Bogdan Paczkowski.
Kamedulski klasztor w Wigrach to bez wątpienia najjaśniejsza.
The Camaldolese Order Monastery in Wigry is definitely one of the biggest
Witam serdecznie
and most important things
dzisiejszej konferencji.
in the region of Suwałki. Now, I am Zbigniew Macewicz, I'm the head of the Suwałki municipality, and I just want to share a few words about the monastery and how we see it as the municipality. It's a very important institution for us. It's a very important object of cultural heritage in the country, and it's definitely the most important monument in the municipality of Suwałki. It's a pearl of architecture, the pearl of sacral architecture with great religious value, artistic value, because it attracts a lot of scientists, researchers, artists, especially because based on historic experience that we have, the history of the monastery is very tumultuous, and for many years it was visited by important persons from various fields. As I mentioned earlier, these include scientists, researchers, artists, and so on. And the monastery in Wigry is not only a building. It's culture. It's some form of culture that introduces us to a different level of civilization. It strengthens our faith, love of God, and as we know, the Camaldolese were the people who actually established the region of Suwałki. They encouraged settlement here, they gave the direction of how the region develops and how the region develops socially, economically. So as people of Suwałki, as the local community, we are indebted to the Camaldolese Order. And we know that the monastery is the pearl of our region. Our coat of arms has a direct reference to the monastery. I don't think you can see it on my jacket, but we have the synchroniold as in our coat of arms, in our emblem. And we value this, we value its spiritual importance and symbolic importance. The monastery is important for the local community, and we are very happy in terms of the history that we share, that we were blessed to have the Camaldolese Order here. For how they allowed our community to grow, to develop, to further cultivate our Christian heritage. We do it in a way that tries to establish how the well-being of the monastery, thanks to the bishop and thanks to efforts done by other people, we are trying to renovate and improve the condition of our local church in Wigry. And I know that the monastery has a lot of soul in it, and it can host many different types of events, scientific events, artistic events. So I believe that everybody can find a place for them in the monastery, and the I also want to mention that the monastery was visited by Pope John Paul II, and his visit was very important, and it left a physical impact of such a great person visiting our region, establishing many tourism routes, cycling routes, kayaking routes. And in general, I think we could start asking ourselves, how would our region look without the monastery? Well, definitely the region would be completely different. We wouldn't have so many tourists, so many guests, thousands of guests visiting us every year, buses full of people coming here, and it's a very important place in the tourism map of Poland, not only Poland, but the region in Europe in general, or even globally. So you have to visit the monastery in Wigry and the Pearl of Suwałki. So this is just a brief reflection that I have of as the head of the local community, and I hope that everybody participating in this conference has very good impressions of it, and I encourage and invite you to visiting our monastery very soon. Thank you very much. Now this was Mr. Zbigniew Mackiewicz, the head of the local community, and I also want to thank Mr. Mackiewicz for participating in our conference and the great cooperation that we have. We are working together on preserving this hallmark of our local community, which is the monastery. And I'm very glad for the work that we are doing together with the municipality, for Mr. Mackiewicz's support and contribution, and I hope that we will further develop the Pearl of Suwalszczyzna for the future.
Powoli dobiega końca nasze wirtualne podsumowanie.
We are nearing the end of our brief summary of the project, which focused on the monastery in Wigry and its important as the cultural heritage of the Camaldolese Order. Now, just a few words again from Father Jacek Nogowski, the president of the foundation VIII Pro. We've heard a lot of warm and kind words today, a lot of thank yous, and I can say that this big group of people, this family, has contributed to the effects that we see. Well, I sense the beauty in your words. I also like to talk about these people as my family, my community, my friends, friends of the monastery, because anybody who visited the monastery at least once wants to come back. They find a lot of solitude, a lot of silence, a lot of rest. They can. Some people come here to talk with a priest. Some people come for the excellent food offered here. Some people come to sail. Others come here to follow the Pope John Paul II's trails and travels. So I'm very happy that this project, Monastery in Wigry, as a cultural heritage of the Camaldolese Order, which was very extensive. It renovated 10 hermitages and the clock tower. So once again, I have to thank to everybody who contributed to the project, who helped to carry it out. And I think that today we can be very happy for its effect. The place is absolutely beautiful and will serve for many years. So once again, thank you to the ministry, to the conservators, to the local authorities, municipal, regional authorities, representatives of many different institutions, the staff of the Wigry Pro Foundation, anybody who gives their minimal support to this excellent endeavor is absolutely important. And I have to also thank to the media that promotes the project. I want to thank Mr. Andrzej Łukiewski, the host of our meeting, for all the media patronage that we experience. We know that it's a very great contribution when the world can hear about us, even online. And so God bless you and thank you. Thank you to Newhouse, the general contractor, for the construction works, the supervisors, Mr. Waldemar, all the employees and workers who contributed materially or spiritually to help the project conclude. So once again, thank you very much, and I hope to see you soon and carry out additional projects. Well, we see that the reasons for visiting the monastery are yet again increasing. So this was Father Jacek Nogowski, the host of the monastery and host of our conference. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for listening to us, and we absolutely encourage you to visit the monastery in Wigry. Once again, I want to show you some landscape shots of the monastery. Thank you very much.